welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with changes for Kit. Chapter 2, To Do. We've got to think of something to write, said Kit. It was Saturday morning, and Kit, Ruthie, and Sterling were up in Kit's attic room, sitting around her typewriter. They were working on a newspaper. Before the Depression, Kit used to make newspapers for her father to tell him what had happened at home while he was away at work all day. Now that her family took in boarders, Kit made newspapers so that everyone in the household knew what was going on. When new boarders arrived, Kit always made a special newspaper to welcome them and to introduce them to the other boarders. Usually, Kit's head was so full of things to write that her fingers couldn't move fast enough on the typewriter keys to keep them up. In this case, however, the new boarders were Uncle Hendrick and his stinky dog, Inky. They've been living with the Kitteridges for more than a week, and so far they had not endeared themselves to anyone. Even Grace, who liked everybody and lavished slobbery affection on complete strangers, kept her distance from Inky and showed a cool indifference to Uncle Hendrick. Kit couldn't think of anything to write about them that was enthusiastic and honest. You could take a photograph of Uncle Hendrick, suggested Sterling. Kit had an old camera that her brother Charlie had fixed for her. She was eager to use it. A picture tells more about a person than words ever could. Maybe, but it costs money to get film developed, said Kit. So I was kind of hoping to take pictures of things I really like. How about a drawing, said Ruthie. You're a good artist, Sterling. You could draw a picture of Uncle Hendrick. And Inky, too, added Kit. All right, said Sterling, opening up his sketchbook. Under my drawing, all right. His bark is worse than his bite. Whose? Asked Ruthie, looking impish. Inky's or Uncle Hendrick's? Kit smiled weakly at Ruthie's joke. Personally, she thought Uncle Hendrick's biting remarks were just as bad as the orders he barked at her. Caring for Uncle Hendrick turned out to be Kit's job. Mother was much too busy, and Dad had a part-time job at the airport. Charlie helped out while Kit was at school, but when she was at home, Uncle Hendrick and Inky were her responsibility, and they were a big one. Uncle Hendrick said he couldn't go up and down the stairs because of his ankle. Before school, Kit had to bring him his morning newspaper and his breakfast tray. She also had to walk Inky. Uncle Hendrick dozed all day, so when Kit came home from school, he was fully awake, full of pepper and vinegar and full of demands and commands. He always made a big to-do list for Kit. Then he made a big speech about how to do everything on the to-do list. Then he made a big to-do about how she had done everything wrong on yesterday's to-do list. And tasks and errands were not all. Uncle Hendrick grew bored sitting in his room with no one but Inky for company. He expected Kit to entertain him. During the first few days, Charlie had helped by playing checkers with Uncle Hendrick. But Charlie won too often, and now Uncle Hendrick didn't want to play checkers with him anymore. He preferred badgering Kit. His idea of a conversation was to snap at her, "What's the capital of Maine?" Or "How much is 7% of 392? Having Uncle Hendrick in the house was every bit as terrible as Kit thought it would be. "Let's just write him in our newspaper that we're sorry Uncle Hendrick hurt his ankle and wrist, and we all hope he's better soon," said Sterling. "That's good," said Kit. She swiveled her chair around to face the desk and began click-clacking away on her old black typewriter. "And it's true, because the sooner he's better, the sooner he and Inky can go home." The headline could be, "The sooner the better," joked Ruthie. Suddenly, bang, 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 a thunderous thumping shook the floor under the children's feet. It was accompanied by ferocious barking. "Yikes," said Ruthie, covering her ears. "What's that?" "What's Uncle Hendrick calling me?" said Kit. "He whacks his ceiling with his cane, and then Inky barks. Better go see what they want." "Go," said Ruthie. "Sterling and I will finish up the newspaper." "Thanks," said Kit. She gave up her chair to Ruthie, and then pelted down the stairs and poked her head into Uncle Hendrick's room. "Do you need me, Uncle Hendrick?" she asked, shouting to be heard. Uncle Hendrick stopped walloping the ceiling. Inky stopped barking, but threw in a few extra yips and growls for good measure. "What on earth is that infernal racket coming from upstairs?" asked Uncle Hendrick crossly. Privately, Kit thought that Uncle Hendrick and Inky were the ones who made the racket, but she answered politely, I was typing. Ruthie and Sterling and I are making a newspaper. What a waste of time, Uncle Hendrick snorted. Making a pretend newspaper. Writing nonsense. Haven't you outgrown such silly childlessness? Kit lifted her chin. She was rather proud of her newspapers. She never wrote nonsense. She loved writing, respected words, and trying hard to find the perfect ones to use, which was not the least bit childish to do. Now, for example, the perfect word to describe how she felt would be annoyed. But Uncle Hendrick didn't notice her annoyance. As usual, he was concerned only about what he wanted. Sit down, he ordered. I'll give you something worthwhile to write. A letter. Uncle Hendrick had broken the wrist on his writing hand. So when he wanted to send a letter, he had to dictate it to Kit. Sometimes Kit thought Uncle Hendrick had named his dog Inky because ink was something he liked so much. Almost every day, Uncle Hendrick dictated a letter. Usually it was a letter to the editor of the newspaper, and usually it was about that man in the White House, which is what Uncle Hendrick called President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Uncle Hendrick did not approve of FDR, which was what most people called the president. He did not like FDR's wife, Eleanor, either. As far as he was concerned, everything that was wrong with the country was their fault. Today, Uncle Hendrick's anger letter was in response to a newspaper article he read about the programs FDR had started as part of the National Recovery Administration to fight the Depression. To the editor, Uncle Hendrick began as soon as Kit was seated with pen and paper. The NRA is a waste of taxpayers' money. It creates useless make-work jobs so the government can hand out money to lazy idlers. FDR is drowning the USA in his alphabet soup of NRA programs, such as the CCC and the CWA. Kit shifted in her chair. Uncle Hendrick knew perfectly well that last year Charlie had worked for the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps in Montana, for 6 months. Every month, Charlie had sent home $25 of the $30 he earned. Her family had depended on it. Charlie liked his experience in the CCC so much that he had hoped to sign up again. Uncle Hendrick also knew that the Civil Works Administration, or the CWA, had given Dad the first job he'd had in almost 2 years. It was just a short-term, part-time, low-paying job clearing land and building stone walls out at the airport. But Dad was glad to be working again. Kit loved seeing him go off to work, whistling and cheerful. He was proud of his work, and he thought it might lead to a better job that would lead to use his skills as a mechanic. The other day at the hangar, he'd met an old friend named Mr. Hesse, who said that soon there might be work repairing airplane engines. Kit pressed her lips together as Uncle Hendrick went on saying critical things about the very programs that were helping her family. In short, Uncle Hendrick wound up, when I say that man in the White House is going to be the ruination of our fine country, all must agree. I don't, thought Kit, but she kept her opinion to herself. She had learned it was useless to argue with Uncle Hendrick. It was best to concentrate on keeping up with him and writing exactly what he said without misspelling any words. If the letter was not perfect, Uncle Hendrick pounced on the mistakes and ordered Kit to copy the whole thing over again. He was a stickler. Kit handed him the letter. He read it, gave it a curt nod of approval, and took the pen and signed it as well as he could with his hand in a cast. They don't print unsigned letters, he said. Now deliver this to Mr. Gibson at the newspaper office immediately. No lollygagging. Yes, sir, said Kit. Uncle Hendrick always acted as if the newspaper editor were waiting breathlessly for his letter and couldn't send the newspaper to press without it. He was absolutely confident that his letter would be printed. And rightly so, it seemed, because many of his letters did appear in the newspaper. Kit thought it was because he was rich and important. But she had to admit that, though she disagreed with what he said, she admired how he said it. Uncle Hendrick expressed his opinions forcefully. He never wasted a word. He said precisely what he meant, with lots of vim and vigor. Ruthie had left, and Sterling was busy drawing a picture of Kit in a new coat for the newspaper. So Kit went off on her errand alone. She knew the way well. Down the hill, past the beautiful fountain in the center city, over 2 blocks and up one. Newspaper offices were not far from the soup kitchen. Kit saw lots of children in rye coats and pitiful shoes, but not the little girl to whom she had given her coat. She hoped the little girl and her mother were home, or at least in a place safe and warm and comfortable. Kit smiled as she went into the big brick building inside the house, the newspaper offices. She climbed the stairs briskly, her footsteps tisk-tisking as she did. She could imagine how Uncle Hendrick would tisk-tisk and sniff disdainfully if he knew how she would love to pretend she was a reporter who worked in the building. She pushed open the door to the newsroom and was greeted with a clamor of telephones ringing, typewriters clacking, and people chatting. The noisy newsroom seemed like heaven to Kit. This is where the newspaper is created, she thought. Stories that thousands of people will read are being written right here, right now. As she walked through the room to Mr. Gibson's desk, several people nodded to her. She delivered letters to the newspaper offices so many times that her face was familiar. Some of the friendlier reporters even knew her name. "Hi, Kit," one said as she passed by. "Got another letter for Gib?" "Yes, I do," Kit said. She knew they all called Mr. Gibson, the editor, Gib. Gib was not very friendly. He sat frowning behind his messy, cluttered desk. When Kit came in, he said without enthusiasm, "Put it in the box." "Yes, sir," said Kit. She put Uncle Hendrick's letter in Gib's inbox on top of lots of other letters and a few rolls of film. And she turned to go. Kit wished she could linger in the newsroom. How she'd love to talk to the reporters. She knew she better hurry home to do her chores. Saturday was the day she always washed all the sheets and put fresh ones on the boarder's bed. It was also the day she and Sterling went around the neighborhood selling eggs. After that, it would be time to help Mother with dinner. Kit was proud of the way she did her chores these days with great efficiency. "I bet I can find time to put the finishing touches on our newspaper," she thought, "unless Uncle Hendrick has something else for me to do." And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.